what a real ghost story sounds like, well, buckle up, because this one is about to get real messy. Welcome to the Bethnal Archives Season 2. Felix here, and I'm back. This time I have got a whole host of awfully disgusting, delicious accounts to tell you about the grim, dark reality hidden in the shadows of London's deepest corners. If you're joining us for the first time, here's a quick word about who we are and what we do. The Bethnal Archives is not just a library. No, that would be far too mundane. We are a repository, a hidden vault beneath the streets of East London, dedicated to documenting the inexplainable, the unclassifiable, and the downright unnatural. We're historians, investigators, and occasionally the last line of defense between our world and everything else. From spectral apparitions to cursed artifacts, our job is to understand, categorize, and, when needed, contain. Sometimes that job does get messy. Today, we're delving into a story that may leave you rethinking your next visit to your local library. This is not fiction, mind. This is about a real curse, a legacy of power, greed, and desperation that stretches back thousands of years. We're talking about the Book of Ill Omens. To truly understand its origins, we must journey back to when the pyramids of Giza stood as a vision, not yet a reality. This was the era of Queen Nitocris. You may not have heard of her. Not how you've heard of Cleopatra or Tutankhamun, but Nitocris was a name whispered with reverence and fear. Her reign is shrouded in myth, but one detail emerges repeatedly: her obsession with completing the pyramids. It wasn't just ambition, it was desperation. She believed the pyramids were more than tombs. They were bridges to eternity, gateways to the afterlife. And she was determined to ensure her place within that eternity. According to ancient accounts, Nitocris made a pact with her gods, or perhaps something darker. What she sought was eternal life, and she got it. But not as you might expect, for the gods don't grant favours without a price. Though Nitocris was given eternal life, it didn't stop her aging. Her body withered, her skin cracked and flaked, and her form shrank into a husk of bones. But she didn't die, for she could not die, for her essence, her mind, her soul remained trapped within that crumbling, skeletal frame, tethered to the world by a pact she had made. What started as a vision of divine immortality became an eternity of torment. But her story didn't end with her body. Centuries passed, the name Nitocris faded into obscurity, whispered only by the shadows of history and mythology. That was until the late 19th century, when the British occupation of Egypt began. This was the golden age of exploration or plunder, depending on how you viewed it, when artifacts were wrenched from their homes and shipped to London to fill the grand halls of the British Museum. Among these relics of breathtaking significance, sarcophagi, gilded canoptic jars, funerary masks, and items of power whose purpose were lost to time. The sands of Egypt held more than secret curses, traps and spirits unwilling to be disturbed. On one such expedition, the crypt of Queen Nitocris was unearthed. On one unassuming, hot, stifling day in the desert, the sun glared down upon the dunes with a ferocity that left no shadow untouched. The air was thick with the smell of sweat and the faint tang of camel leather mingling with the earthy scent of freshly disturbed sand. Digging crews toiled the dust, their shovels biting into the ancient soil that had not seen the light of day for millennia. and there was a crypt, sealed and forgotten. A heavy limestone door marked with hieroglyphics warning trespassers to stay away. Of course, warnings never stopped anyone. When the door was pried open, the stale air of the crypt billowed outward. It carried the dry, metallic tang of ancient decay and faint, sweet rot of offerings left to mummify with the dead. The British expedition team, arrogant, eager, and woefully unprepared, stepped into the gloom. But, my dear friends, they were not alone, for Queen Nitocris had been locked away by her people. Enslaved people who, in a desperate act of defiance, bound her essence to her withered bones and sealed her in this tomb. They carved wards of protection into the walls, glyphs meant to keep her essence from escaping. The crypt was her prison, where her restless spirit could not harm anyone. That was, of course, until the British arrived. The crypt beneath the desert sands was unlike anything the expedition team had ever encountered. I've read their notes, studied their accounts, and even decades later, you can feel the unease creeping through their words. The walls of the tomb were lined with hieroglyphs, illuminated only by flickering lantern light that cast restless shadows. The air was heavy, not just with the weight of history, but with something else entirely. Something alive. The team was led by an impatient expedition leader. He entered with a mixture of reverence and arrogance. They were scholars, yes, but also opportunists, and among them was a young magician, an idealist and a fool in equal measure, whose fascination with the supernatural would prove their undoing. The magician was the first to speak, his excitement cutting through the tension like a blade.
Extraordinary. The preservation. Look at these carvings, the detail. The Egyptians truly knew how to keep their secrets.
The leader, brusque and impatient, had little time for admiration. To him, this was a job, a treasure hunt, nothing more.
We're not here to admire, boy. Catalogue what's necessary and leave the rest. Anything we don't take goes to London for proper analysis.
The archaeologist, a sharp and cautious woman, was the only one who seemed to sense the weight of their intrusion. She snapped at the younger members to handle the artifacts with care, her tone laced with warning.
Careful with those tools. You break anything and the museum's budget won't cover the fallout.
As they worked, a hum began to build in the background. Subtle at first, like the distant thrum of wind through a canyon. But it wasn't wind. The air itself seemed to pulse, growing heavier with each passing moment. The young magician, his eyes wide with fear, spoke up.
Does anyone else feel that? It's like the air's heavier here.
The leader scoffed, his boots grinding against the loose dirt as he stepped forward. He waved off the magician's concerns, but even he couldn't mask the slight tremor in his voice.
It's a tomb, lad. It's meant to feel heavy. Now quit your whining and get to work. We're on schedule.
The archaeologist wasn't convinced. She glanced towards the shadows, her unease growing with the hum that now seemed to reverberate through the very walls.
You've come to free me? Or to defile me again?
The room fell silent. Tools clattered to the stone floor as the team froze, their eyes darting towards the shadows. The leader raised his lantern, the flame flickering as if it caught an unseen wind.
Who said that?
Nobody said anything. Get back to work.
That didn't sound like an echo. It sounded like someone.
Despite their efforts, they couldn't ignore it, for the hum had grown into a wail, mournful and bone-deep, resonating from the very stones around them. Then she appeared, a flickering, desiccated form, her presence radiating sorrow and fury. Queen Nitocris, her shadow shifting between solid and ethereal, her eyes glowing with green light of the underworld.
You cannot stop what you've begun. End this.
End me. Let me rest.
A ghost. A real ghost.
Don't just stand there, you fool. Back away.
By the gods.
The air crackled with tension. A faint green glow pulsed faintly from the back of the chamber. The shadows coalesced into a spectral form, flickering, desiccating, radiating an aura of shadow and sorrow. But the magician didn't listen. He reached into his satchel, pulling out a crude wooden talisman etched with poorly carved symbols.
No, wait! I can help. I've studied this. Druidic binding rituals. I can contain her.
The archaeologist grabbed his arm, her voice sharp with panic.
Are you insane? You have no idea what you're dealing with.
Leave it be,
back
damn it.
now.
This is not your fight.
But it was too late. The young magician began chanting, his voice raised over the growing hum of power, and the spell, frantic and disjointed, a haphazard mixture of conjure and hubris. Nitocris' spectral form twisted violently, her glowing eyes narrowing as the words took hold of her.
Fools! You do not know what you invoke!
Her roar and agonized screams pierced the air as green energy crackled through the room. The magician shook her off. His hands trembled but resolute as he began to chant. The leader roared in protest, but the words were already spilling from the young man's lips. The spell was frantic, a disjointed, haphazard mixture of courage and hubris. Nitocris' form twisted violently, her screams piercing the air. Green energy crackled throughout the room, the walls trembled under its force. The archaeologists tried to pull him back, but a burst of power sent them all stumbling. The chant reached its peak, and with a deafening crack, the crypt fell silent. When the dust had finally cleared, Nitocris' form was gone, but in the magician's trembling hand, a tattered book glowed faintly with an unearthly light. His expression was a mix of triumph and terror.
You reckless idiot! What have you done?
You've bound her all right, but you've unleashed something else entirely. Get that thing to London immediately. We're done here.
And so the magician's desperate act bound the essence of Queen Nitocris into the closest object at hand, a tattered, forgotten tome unearthed within the same crypt. It wasn't just any book. It was a text of ancient spells, curses, and rituals, a vessel steeped in dark energy. Her spirit merged within its pages, her agony inscribed in ink, her power trapped within its spine. The team finally returned to London, needing to understand the consequences of their actions fully, and over time, the book passed through many hands, collectors, scholars, thieves, and eventually found its way to the British Library, where it would lie dormant for decades, waiting for its power to be unleashed again. The Book of Ill Omens story doesn't just end with its confinement in the British Library. No, that would be far too easy, of course. Its journey took several dark turns, and its whispers reached ears eager for power and forbidden knowledge. Sometime in the 1950s, the book was stolen, an incident buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and embarrassment. Its details never fully released to the public. From there, it disappeared into the shadows of the black market, emerging in the hands of history's most infamous collector, Aleister Crowley. You've likely heard of him, an occultist, mystic, a self-proclaimed magician whose name remains synonymous with black magic and the esoteric. Crowley's appetite for the arcane was boundless. His collection reflected that. Many manuscripts, relics, and artifacts tied to dark rituals filled his troves. The Book of Ill Omens would have been irresistible with its tortured spirit and ancient power. Crowley's later years were as chaotic as his life. His health eventually failed, his reputation was crumbled, and he died in obscurity in 1947. His possessions, however, were a very different story, for after his death, many scholars, collectors, and opportunists picked apart the collection. And at an auction held some years later, the book resurfaced and was sold to a private collector who later became a patron of the Bethnal Archives. The book was brought here under the guise of preservation, carefully catalogued and sealed, or so he thought. Sue Fletcher. Yes, well, she joined the Bethnal Archives in around the mid-1970s, obviously long before my time, but by my calculations she served almost 20 years before her name became synonymous with one of our most infamous cases. Now, I've worked at the archives for nearly 3 decades and studied every detail of her records. What happened to Sue wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. The protocols were, let's say, not as robust as today's, for in those times the archives were less a fortified institution and more a repository of eccentric curiosities. Items came and went with minimal documentation, and protective measures were crude. You see, when the Book of Ill Omens arrived, there were no quarantine protocols or esoteric safeguards, and Sue, bless her, eager and curious, volunteered to begin her study. From her journals, we know that she was captivated by the book from the moment it crossed her desk. Her early entries meticulously described it. The cracked leather binding, the faint scent of decay that lingered around it, and the glyphs etched into the spine that seemed to shift in certain lights. She noticed its context, a mix of ancient Egyptian spells, fragmented incantations, and what appeared to be personal musings from the magician who had bound Nitocris to its pages. At first, Sue approached the book with cautious optimism. Some glyphs she recognized as protective wards, but others defied her understanding. Over several nights, she began translating the text, uncovering fragments of the magician's story. His name remains unknown, but as Sue deciphered them, she realized his intentions were far from noble. He was no hero. The magician who bound Nitocris wasn't seeking to end her torment. He was seeking to harness it. His writing spoke of an immortal queen, the spirit of unmatched power, who could grant him dominion over life and death. He used a druidic binding spell, crudely adapted, to imprison her in the nearest vessel, a book already brimming with dark energy, and in doing so, he turned the Book of Ill Omens into a nexus of her rage, her suffering, and his ambitions. Sue would suggest that the mad magician may have known about Nitocris the entire time, and had guided his party unknowingly into her lair so he could trap her. Sue's translations became erratic after this discovery. Her handwriting grew jagged, the language shifting between English and what appeared to be ancient Egyptian. She wrote of hearing whispers when the room was silent, of shadows that seemed to stretch towards her, and by the 3rd day her colleagues noticed the changes. She stopped eating, her once bright demeanour dulled, her energy drained. "The voice is louder now," she wrote. "She calls me, not in anger, not yet, but she knows I can hear her." The possession took hold gradually. On the 4th day, Sue locked herself in her office, claiming she needed privacy for her work. Her colleagues reported hearing her speak aloud in a language they couldn't place, her voice low and guttural. And by the 5th day, she stopped coming to meetings altogether. And on the 6th, well, she vanished. And that's when the other archivists found her. Sue was barely recognizable. Her skin had paled, her eyes sunken and bloodshot. She was sitting in her office, the book open before her, pages smeared with what we later discovered to be her blood. The entity of Nitocris had taken her completely. What followed was a nightmare. A rampage through the archives, injuries of multiple staff, and worst of all, several murders. Sue was subdued and taken into custody, eventually committed to a high-security mental institution. She remained there for decades, her mind fractured, her body a shell of her former self. And then silence for years. The book was thought lost, misplaced in the chaos following Sue's rampage. The archives were rebuilt, protocols improved, and Sue became no more than a ghost story, a cautionary tale told to recruits. That was until now. Recently we discovered that the Book of Ill Omens has resurfaced. It was sold on the dark web, passing through the hands of a criminal syndicate specializing in stolen records known as the Nine-Thorned Fingers. This isn't just any gang. They cater to exclusive clientele, celebrities, artists, billionaires seeking rare, forbidden artifacts. Their operations are global and their network is impenetrable. And now the book is central to their latest transaction. The Nine-Thorned Fingers operated in the shadows for decades, their origins tracing back to the immediate aftermath of World War II. Their founders were a group of ex-soldiers, men who had returned from war with more than just stories. They brought back relics, artifacts, treasures plundered from all across Europe, the Middle East and beyond. Initially, their motives seemed opportunistic. Faced with government demands to turn over these items to museums and archives, the soldiers saw an opportunity to profit instead. Rather than surrendering their spoils, they began selling the artifacts on the black market. This marked the birth of the Nine-Thorned Fingers, a network that has grown into one of the most secretive and dangerous organizations in the trade of forbidden relics. Over the years, the gang expanded its operations, shifting from looted war artifacts to dealing with occult items. Their clientele became increasingly exclusive. Celebrities, collectors, and those paying vast sums for a brush with the forbidden. The Nine-Thorned Fingers were your answer if you wanted something rare, dangerous, or cursed. And now the same network has brought us to the present day. At the center of the latest case is a high-profile makeup artist and influencer, a celebrity known for her artistry and fascination with the occult. Her collection of rare antiques has been the subject of envy among collectors, but her obsession with the macabre has also drawn whispers of unease. Still, no one could have predicted the tragedy that would follow. The police were called to her sprawling mansion late one evening, just a few months ago, responding to reports of screaming and gunshots. What they found was a scene of unimaginable horror. The celebrity missing and her secret lover and every member of her household staff were found dead. The victims had been arranged in a disturbingly deliberate manner, their bodies forming patterns that mirrored ancient Egyptian ritualistic sacrifices. Symbols were drawn in blood on the walls, etched into the floors and marked on the victims themselves. Forensic experts were baffled, noting that many symbols were nothing they recognized. The precision and ritualistic nature all pointed to something far beyond the ordinary. The crime scene defied logical explanation, and that's of course when the Bethnal Archives were brought in. What we're looking at isn't just another case of possession. This is far darker, rooted in the ancient past and woven into the fabric of our present. The connection between these murders, the Nine-Thorned Fingers, and the Book of Ill Omen points to a danger that may stretch far beyond anything we've faced before here at the archives. And that's how I ended up outside a mansion in Hampstead, staring at a crime scene that looked like something straight out of an Egyptian underworld. If we haven't crossed paths before, let me introduce myself. I'm Virgil. I'm a freelancer here at the archives, and I'm more of a boots on the ground kind of guy. I delve in a bit of magic, exorcise a few demons, a few ghosts, and whatever other weird shit I can find. The place was like a fortress. High gates, sharp iron points. There was cameras on every corner, like the owner had something to hide. And now, her secrets were laid out for the whole world to see. I lit a fresh cigarette, stepped out of my car, and had a look at the driveway. The entire place was swarming with cops. The uniforms didn't know what they were looking at, but they knew it wasn't right. And to be honest, neither did I. Imogen was there already, stepping out of her little mini like any other Tuesday. She looked out of place like she always did. Sharp lab coat over jeans and boots that still had mud from the last swamp she'd dug through. She had that determined look in her eye, which said she'd already decided she would find something meaningful, whether the universe liked it or not. The officers were all on edge, their eyes darting between the mansion and us like we might be the next threat. One of them, a sergeant, judging by the stripes on his sleeve, stepped forward to block the path. His face was set like concrete, but the tremble in his fingers gave him away.
Oh, you're the one from that place?
That's right. I flashed the badge. Bethnal Archives. You called us in, remember?
It isn't good in here. Real bad. I don't know how you stomach it.
Well, occupational hazard, I guess. Why don't you start with giving me the debrief, Sergeant?
Right, victims were discovered about an hour ago. One of the lads first on the scene nearly fainted. Said he's never seen anything like it. Bodies are mutilated, arranged in some kind of pattern. Maybe a ritual. Blood everywhere. Symbols on the walls and floors. A couple of boys swear the symbols moved when they looked at them too long. But, well, you know how it gets.
Yeah, I know how it gets.
We've cleared the scene as much as we can, but the forensics teams won't go near it until you lot take a look.
Good.
Says it's unnatural. Like it's still watching them.
You and your boys stay outside. Understood?
Understood. We're not exactly lining up to go back in there.
Keep it that way. Last thing we need is more bodies to clean up. Real bad, huh? Fucking hell, let's see how bad it is. The sergeant stepped aside reluctantly, his nervous eyes flicking between me and the mansion's towering doors. I didn't say much. There wasn't much point. His face told me enough. Whatever was waiting inside, he wasn't pretty. I stepped through the front doors and the smell hit me like a wall. That place smelled rotten, like meat left out in the sun and pennies clutched in sweaty hands. It clung to the back of my throat, thick and metallic, and beneath it was something else, something older, harder to place, but undeniably foul. My eyes scanned the grand hall. It was a grotesque in every way, a showcase of wealth and excess now smeared in blood. The marble floors were streaked with it, splatters climbing up gilded mirrors, dripping onto tapestries worth more than I'd make in a lifetime. The whole scene reeked of intent. Whoever done this wasn't just killing. They were saying something. But it wasn't to us. Nah. This was something older, ritualistic, a conversation with something ancient. Behind me I heard Imogen's footsteps. Light but purposeful. She stepped into the room and froze, her breath catching briefly before she clamped a gloved hand over her mouth. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. The look in her eye said it all. Without hesitation, she crossed to the first body, her movements controlled, methodical, like a surgeon prepping for an operation. I watched her kneel beside this body, her gloved hands ready to work, peeling back the layers of this nightmare, one meticulous detail at a time. Imogen didn't flinch, didn't falter. That's the thing about her. Where most people see carnage, she sees evidence. Puzzles waiting to be solved. I lit a cigarette, the sharp scent of smoke cutting through the rot just for a second. I leaned back against the cold marble wall. Whatever was going on here, I knew something for sure. We were standing in the middle of something far bigger than a murder scene, and it wasn't over yet. Everything okay, Doc?
Fine, Virgil. Now stop interrupting me. Mid-20s, marked post-mortem rigidly. The lividity pattern indicates the body has been moved at least once since death. Fractures along the humerus and the ulna are consistent with forced manipulation. Skin is pallid, with distant areas of discoloration here and there.
Do you always talk when you work, or just for my benefit?
Not for you, obviously. For my notes. Cervical region shows no visible trauma. Tongue isn't swollen. Likely not asphyxiation. No signs of external hemorrhaging. Wait. Here we go. Linear burn markings, symmetrical around both wrists. These aren't accidental. The edges are too clean, as if made by conductive heat.
Okay, so what does it mean in smooth brain language like mine?
It means something didn't just hurt her. They were marking for something, like a signature or a directive. Discoloration around the epigastric region. Burn patterns match the ones on the wrists, localized scorching in a pattern, symmetrical again. The epidermis is seared, and look here.
Yeah.
There's internal trauma. Whoever did this wasn't just branding her. They used tools, delicate ones, precise.
Yeah, but I mean, look at the state of the place. Still sloppy work though, right?
Not sloppy, purposeful. This wasn't an attack, it was a process. The burns, the incisions are layered, one injury amplifying the next, like sequential phrases in a surgical procedure. These sigils are integrated into the trauma. Egyptian origin? Corrupted through successive interactions. Someone's taken ancient inscriptions and warped them.
I stepped back a bit, letting Imogen get closer to the symbols. My eyes scanned around the room as something was glinting faintly in the corner of my eye. Something beneath the grand piano. I walked over and crouched, fished out a small gold amulet half covered in blood. The centre inset with a cracked ruby. Hey Imogen, look what we got here. She took the amulet, inspected it carefully, her gaze sharpening as she flipped it over, revealing jagged carvings etched into its back.
Eye of Horus. Protective symbolism. But this is subverted. The carvings here, they've been modified to reverse the flow of energy. Instead of protecting the bearer, they act as a conduit.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. So they use this as some kind of ritual anchor, possibly to summon some kind of entity. And looking at the sigils carved into their backs, they match the sigils on the amulet. Ritualistic murders, summoning gone wrong. We've got a hell of a pie here. What happened after seemed to happen way too quickly, for Imogen and Virgil pieced together the threads, combed through the victim's journal, crime scene evidence, and even scraps of historical records in record time. Sorry about the pun there. Their work led them back to the British Museum, which had seen more than its fair share of the paranormal. The spirit possessing the celebrity seemed to have a singular goal: to reunite itself with a piece of her past. A connection that could give her a new tangible form. For in the museum's Egyptian collection, there was plenty of mummies. The connection was too perfect, the timing too precise to be a coincidence. The spirit sought to transfuse herself into the body of another Egyptian pharaoh. Before we could sort out a proper plan, Virgil was dispatched to intercept her before the ritual could be completed. Now, Virgil has always been stubborn, scrappy, resourceful, and just reckless enough to keep things interesting, but this was one of those times when his talents were stretched thin. He told me later what happened that night, though you could still see the wear of it in his eyes as he spoke. The British Museum's ancient halls filled with history, and the quiet menace became a battleground. He arrived just before midnight. The city was quiet, and the museum loomed large and foreboding under the dim streetlights. The side entrance was unlocked for him, and a young security guard, pale and jittery, let him in. The kid had heard the rumours about the killer and the supernatural powers and didn't look like he wanted to be there. There was a faint groan as the museum door closed behind Virgil, and he stepped in to the darkened hallway. The guard fidgeted, his hands never straying too far from his radio.
You're the specialist, yeah? The one who's supposed to deal with whatever this is.
Something like that. What's the situation?
Stuff's been moving that shouldn't be. Shadows, noises, and now we've got someone in here who's, what the reports say, not entirely human.
Look, stay out of my way. Keep the other guards clear and don't try and be a hero. I'll handle it. He said the air felt wrong when he stepped inside. Heavy, charged like the walls held their breath. The Egyptian gallery was his destination, but he didn't make it far before the first screams shattered the uneasy quiet. I heard a cry echoing down the marble halls, sharp, panicked, followed by unmistakable sounds of a struggle. I broke into a jog, my boots thudding against the floor as the noise grew louder. When I rounded the corner, I saw the sight that stopped me cold. 3 guards were sprawled across the floor, their bodies mangled. Blood trailed across the tiles, thick and glistening, leading straight towards the Egyptian gallery. I crouched, my hand brushing the edge of the crimson smear. Well, shit. This isn't good. The trail ended at the shattered doors of the gallery. The stench of rotten blood hit me like a wall as I stepped through. Glass crunched underfoot, the remains of a display case glittering in the faint emergency lights, and at the centre of it all, she floated. The possessed woman, if you could even call her that. Her body hung unnaturally in the air, her feet inches above the ground, with tendrils of green energy crackled around her, buzzing like live wires. And at her feet, shattered canoptic jars spilt their grisly contents, organs that shouldn't have been fresh, but somehow were. Right then, time to try this the old-fashioned way. I reached for my police-issued taser, its familiar weight grounding me. It isn't the tool I wanted, but it's the one the Met Special Branch insisted I used. The barbs fired with a sharp crack, embedding in the woman's chest, and for a moment, the electricity surged, her body jerking violently. But then, she stopped, her eyes glowing, locked onto me. She grabbed the wires and pulled, the taser ripping out of my hands, clattering me to the floor as she yanked me forward. My boots skidded against the blood-slicked floor. Shit. And then, everything exploded. Glass shattered, a rain of shards, falling like jagged stars. Green energy surged through the room, shaking along the walls and into the relics. And then stillness. As my eyes adjusted around the room, I realised the mummies started twitching, their hands jerking, then limbs until they fully rose from their slumber. Their desiccated faces twisted in a rage, and they turned their glowing eyes towards me. Oh, for fuck's sake. The nearest mummy lunged, its brittle hands outstretched. I dodged, my shoulder grazing across the stone sarcophagus as I scrambled for distance. Now grinning wickedly, the possessed woman sent a tendril of energy lashing towards me. It smashed into a wall next to me, leaving a scorched mark. I didn't have time to think. Fire. Fire always works on the dead. I muttered an incantation, my words sparking as a small orb of flame flickered to life. I tried to hurl it at the nearest mummy, the fire catching on its ancient wrappings. It started to stumble, its hollow scream echoing through the room as it collapsed in a smouldering heap. But magic's tricky, especially in a place filled with so much history and death. I I raised my other hands, forming a faint shimmering barrier. It wavered, the spell weak and unsteady, but it held against the first few strikes of the woman's energy tendrils. Each hit sending cracks splintering through the shield until it shattered completely. Jesus fucking hell. Alright, plan B. I dove behind a fallen statue, the possessed woman's laughter echoing in my ears. There was green energy illuminating in the room and her tendrils were snaking closer. I closed my eyes, concentrating as I summoned another spell. A brilliant and searing light filled the gallery, forcing the mummies and the woman to recoil. But the light flickered. It was unstable. It faded almost as quickly as it came. Fucking bloody useless. The mummies started to close in again. Their brittle fingers were clawing at me. I was fighting them off, grappling. They had surprising strength for creatures so old. The woman floated closer. I could see her tendrils lashing out wildly, shattering the columns and shattering debris. I was all out of options and still she wasn't done. I knew what I had to do. I felt kind of reluctant at first, but I didn't have much choice at this point. Hello, Joe here with a halfway point. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first episode of Season 2 of the Bethnal Archives. I hope you like the new format and the new video length. It seems that 90% of the people who do watch and enjoy these videos don't like, subscribe or comment on the videos. By just liking it or subscribing it, or even if you don't want to subscribe but commenting, will do us a massive favour and help push this channel more so we can grow. And also it gives me here at the archives some KPIs to feed back to my manager so that I can carry on making these podcasts and prove that this is working and hopefully keep my job. Thanks very much, and let's get back to the story. Virgil's not one to ask for help unless he absolutely needs it. That night though, with mummies clawing at him and the air thick with death and green energy, he made the call. Not that he was helpless. Virgil's resourceful, but even he knew this wasn't something he could handle alone.
This is Virgil Glove. I'm in the Egyptian Gallery, British Museum. I need immediate backup. Ashen Vale and police priests if you got them.
Understood. Reinforcements en route.
Now, to stay alive long enough for them to get here. What he didn't tell me until later was just how bad it got after the call. The possessed woman wasn't trying to watch him anymore. She was playing with him, toying with him like a cat with a mouse. And Virgil, well, he was running out of tricks. The woman floated closer, her tendrils and energy snapping at the air like whips. Virgil stood out from the column, his hands raised in a defensive stance, and muttered a quick incantation. A faint shimmer appeared around him, a protective ward. It flickered though, unstable, but it was better than nothing.
You think your pitiful magic can stop me? You are nothing but a spark in a storm.
Her voice was layered, both hers and something far older, more malevolent. She thrust her hand forward and a green tendril of green energy lashed out, striking the ward. The barrier cracked but held. Virgil gritted his teeth, his fingers twitching as he prepared another spell. Yeah, well, let's see how you like a spark in your face. He hurled a fire orb at her. It wasn't large, barely the size of a cricket ball, but it shot through the air with precision, though she swatted it aside effortlessly.
Is that the best you can do?
The flames sputtering out as they hit the floor. She lashed again, her tendril snapping towards his ward. The barrier shattered this time, a force sending Virgil stumbling back. He hit the floor hard, his head ringing as she loomed over him.
You will kneel before me, and then you will die.
Virgil scrambled to his feet, his hands igniting with a weak, flickering flame. He threw it, missing entirely, but the distraction was long enough to give him space. He ducked behind a toppled sarcophagus, panting as he searched for his next move. And luckily, that's when the cavalry arrived. The heavy thud of bootsteps echoed through the gallery, followed by deep, rhythmic chanting. The air seemed to shift, the oppressive energy giving way to something stronger, more grounded. Virgil peeked out from behind his cover to see them. Finally, the ashen veil, their robes flowing, their hands raised in unison as they chanted a binding ritual. Behind them, the priests entered, their weapons drawn and gleaming with their sanctified silver weapons.
Man, contain the undead. The entity is a priority. Now, Virgil, stay out of our way.
The first shot rang out, the sound echoing like a thunderclap. A silver-tipped bullet struck a mummy square in the chest, its dry form crumbling into ash. Another officer fired, and another mummy fell, their aim precise and practiced. But the woman, now surrounded, merely laughed, a sound that reverberated in layers, as if a dozen voices were speaking through her.
You bring your toys to fight a god!
Her form began to shift, the green tendril snapping violently against the veil's forming barrier. But suddenly, the chanting faltered for a moment, and the light in the gallery dimmed. It was replaced by a pulsating glow as the woman's body twisted. Her features elongated and her feet lifted higher. Her flesh seemed to dissolve, peeling away in strips of shadow and energy until only a ghostly, eldritch form remained, a creature of translucent green fire and skeletal wings that stretched impossibly wide.
Oh, well, that's new.
The creature screamed a loud, otherworldly sound that shattered what glass remained. The mummies surged forward, faster now, their movements no longer stilted but fluid, feral. The police priests fired in quick succession, their bullets dropping the undead one by one. But it wasn't enough. The room was chaos. Virgil's good in a fight, I'd give him that, but this wasn't just a fight, this was a battleground, and he was right in the middle of it. Virgil ducked as another tendril lashed out, narrowly missing him, leaving a smoking scar across the marble floor. He rolled into the side, igniting another small fire orb in his hand and hurled it at the creature, but it passed harmlessly through the ghostly form.
Great. Fire's useless. Well, good to know, I guess.
Another tendril struck, catching him across the shoulder and sprawling him. He hit the ground hard, his breath was knocked from his lungs. He struggled to his feet and felt the weight in his pocket. A knuckle duster, a simple piece of steel etched with protective sigils and blessed by every faith the archives could find.
It wasn't much, but it was something.
He slipped it into his hand, the metal cold against his skin. The creature loomed over him, its skeletal wings casting jagged shadows across the room. The ashen veil's chants grew desperate, their voices rising as they tried to hold the barrier against the creature's power, but it faltered, cracks forming in the circle as the beast pushed back.
All right, love, let's dance.
He surged forward, ducking under the lashing tendril and driving his fist upward. The knuckle duster connected with the creature's form, and for the first time, it reacted. The sigils flared, the beast recoiled, its scream shaking the walls. And that's the thing they don't say about sigils. They don't need to be fancy. Sometimes all it takes is a bit of steel and stubbornness. The creature lashed out wildly, its tendrils smashing into the columns and statues, sending debris raining down. Virgil dodged and weaved, his knuckles flashing as he landed blow after blow, each leaving searing marks on the creature's translucent form.
Focus fire on the entity.
The officers shifted their aim, the bullets stretching forward towards the creature. The combined force of the Veil's chants, the priest's silver rounds, and Virgil's relentless strikes began to take its toll. The creature's form flickered, its screams growing weaker.
Do you think your trifling mortal bullets, your hollow prayers, can undo the threads of what has been woven for millennia? You are ants, crawling in the shadows of powers you cannot fathom, gnawing at the corners of a world you cannot understand. was Nitocris, Queen of Kemet, ruler of sands and stars. The gods themselves bowed before me, their whispers carving the path to eternity. And when the living betrayed me, when my people turned their backs on the pact I forged to secure their legacy, I did not falter. I am the bridge between life and death, between the seen and the unseen. While your ancestors were scratching their feeble marks on stone, I was carving my will into the bones of this earth. You cannot end what has no end. You cannot kill what does not live.
Vale's chant surged, drowning out her words as the shimmered barrier solidified once more. The silver rounds continued to strike, piercing her translucent form, and Virgil moved in closer, his knuckle duster glowing faintly in his hand. The creature faltered, her wings folding inward, and the light of her began to dim.
Eternity's overrated.
With a final surge of energy, Virgil drove his knuckle duster into the creature's core. The sigils flared brighter than ever, and the creature released one last shattering scream before imploding into a burst of green light. The mummies collapsed instantly, their forms crumbling to dust as the gallery fell silent. When it was over, Virgil stood there, covered in dust and blood, the knuckle duster still glowing faintly in his hand, but he didn't say much when the Veil approached to confirm the entity was gone. Later, when he returned to the archives, he dropped the knuckle duster on my desk and said, "You owe me a new jacket." Typical Virgil. Looking back at it all, it's difficult to know where to begin, summing up a story like this. It's the kind of tale that leaves a mark. It lodges itself in your thoughts and refuses to let go. The truth is, I've seen a lot in my years here at the archives. Plenty that would send most running for the hills, but this case felt different. Maybe it's the sheer scale of what we uncovered. A spirit of ancient power trying to reclaim a form it was never meant to have. The Nine-Thorned Fingers, meddling in forces they couldn't possibly understand, sold off historical fragments to the highest bidder. And then, of course, Virgil punches a godlike entity back to the underworld with a bloody knuckle duster. The absurdity of it all almost makes me laugh. Almost. I mean, the human cost sits with me the most. The lives lost in the mansion, the guards who never stood a chance, and even the possessed celebrity herself. None of them deserved what happened to them. And as much as we would like to think we've won by containing the chaos, by putting things back in order, there's no bringing those people back. That's the hardest part. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What would drive someone like Queen Nitocris to such lengths? Was it just ambition, desperation, or rage, or something else entirely? Whatever it was, it's clear that the chaos of her choices are still being felt thousands of years later. That's the kind of thing that keeps me up at night. Not the ghosts or the curses, but the thought that we're all just one bad decision away from becoming a story like hers. From an archival perspective, I'd classify this as a Class 7, unclassified, dangerous phenomena with elements of Class 6, malevolent entity. Nitocris' spirit, while bound and defeated for now, still poses a threat. The damage she caused and the power she displayed made it clear that we're dealing with something far beyond the usual possession or haunting. The involvement of the Nine-Thorned Fingers complicates matters even further. Their reaches extends far beyond this one, and I doubt it'll be the last we hear of them. The book, of course, has been returned to the archives under its highest level of containment. Imogen's already started documenting its properties, though she's been far more cautious than Sue Fletcher was ever. Lessons learned, I suppose. As for me, well, I feel slightly unsettled. There's a certain weight knowing just that, even with all our knowledge and preparation, we're still just scratching the surface of what's out there. It's humbling in a way, but it's also a reminder of why we do what we do. Who will if we don't stand against this kind of darkness? And I'd admit I'm leaning on my staff more than usual after this one. Imogen's as sharp as ever, though I do worry about the toll this will take on her. She is meticulous and methodical, but there's a heaviness to her now. Quite sort of a burden she doesn't want to talk about. Virgil, on the other hand, seems to bounce back like nothing ever happened. He's back to stomping around the archives, cracking jokes and bringing in questionable coffee. But I know him well enough to see through it. He's carrying this, even though he doesn't want anyone to know about it. Edward's already started looking into the Nine-Thorned Fingers, trying to map out their operations and figure out how this book ended up on the black market in the first place. If anyone can trace the breadcrumbs, it's him. And Eliza's been delving into the folklore surrounding Nitocris, hoping to uncover anything that we might have missed. She's young, eager and idealistic, exactly the kind of person we need keeping this place running. The thing about the archives is, there's always what's next. The moment we wrap up a case, another one comes knocking. That's the nature of this work. My priority is ensuring that the Book of Ill Omens stays contained. So what's next? I suppose it's the same as always. Catalogue, investigate, protect. We're the caretakers in a way, guardians of the strange and the dangerous. It's not an easy job, and it doesn't come with much glory, but it matters. And I'll be here as long as there are mysteries to unravel, curses to contain, and lives to protect. We'll all be here. That's what the archives are for. So if you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this story. And remember, the next time you pass an unassuming door in East London, the kind that seems too ordinary to be important, don't dismiss it too quickly. We never know what's behind it. Hello, I'm back, Joe the intern. Thank you so much for tuning in to episode 1 of season 2. Wow, this has been an absolute mammoth to produce. Thank you so much to some of the reenactors I got involved today to tell this tale. You heard David Streams, Killian Lefevre, Olivia Hart, Lee Martin Thomas, and me, Joe the intern. See you next time, and remember to like, subscribe, comment, give us some love if you've enjoyed it, because these are absolutely mammoth to create for you guys. Bye bye for now.